All right, well, thank you guys so much for joining me. I found, but also with the last update, there has been a lot of lore books that have been introduced, and a few of them was actually really quite interesting. So, there's one here by the illustrious and revered Professor Bondin Amapongo. Greetings and salutations, dear reader. It is I, Professor Bondin Amapongo. You've no doubt heard of me due to my legendary discoveries gathering data for the Encyclopedia Palia, or my well-chronicled exploits of entomology monthly. When my friends at the Bahari Institute asked me to come to the region and document some of the unique insects that I call the area home, I was unable to resist. I had my eye on a trip to this lovely region for years, and I simply cannot wait to catalog some of the marvelous specimens found here, including the Kilima night moth, a variant with beautiful silvery wings. After 4 days of traveling by coach, I finally arrived in Kilima village, a cozy little hamlet near the coast where the inn has good drinks and friendly company. Though this place is clearly a backwater, seeing as no one here has ever heard of me. The locals, however, make an apple cobbler that is nothing like you've ever tasted. It is, no doubt, how the innkeeper became the stout man he is today. Before I head out for research, I purchased every cobbler that I can find in the village, stuffed myself near to bursting with its sticky, syrupy deliciousness, and packed as many as I can fit into my travel pack. This caused a brief kerfuffle with the local mayor, who initially complained about my cobbler apocalypse, mumbling something about needing them for an upcoming festival. Clearly, the portly fellow wanted all the pies for himself. When I told him I was here on business from the Institute, however, his demeanor quickly changed and he became my escort for the day. That was the treatment I should have received upon my arrival, but better late than never, I suppose. Though this place is quaint, my brief time here in Kilima village has been rather enjoyable overall. This morning I left the comfort of the village for the back country, where better to find the most impressive specimens and expand my legacy further. After all, one does not get to be as famous as I without going the extra distance to find the truly extraordinary. This particular area is known for its population of jewel-winged dragonflies. Showing off their iridescent golden and green bodies, this is a majestic, beautiful, and quite elusive creature. It is unlikely that someone like you, dear reader, could ever hope to capture one alive. It requires the utmost coordination and skill, but I, Professor Bonlin Amapongo, am no amateur. I shall capture and catalog one and report here once I have a magnificent specimen in hand. Dirty, sneaky little trickster. After almost an hour pursuing it, I was about to capture my quarry when I was tripped down the hill, stumbling end over end. Someone as famous as I could never be so clumsy. So obviously, the notion proposed by some that the tree root had already been there is completely preposterous. Editor's note, this is a well-known area, and the tree root in question has been there for decades. Clearly, the vile and devious jewel wing sprung a trap for me. I hurtled down the hill uncontrollably until a tree stopped my tumble, ending in all of my delicious apple cobbler being smashed all over myself and my belongings. No doubt this is part of that little menace's plan. Now I am sore from the impact and tired from the excursion. I'll just lay here for a little while and rest, and eat what cobbler hasn't been destroyed to get my energy back before I continue my research. Thieves! Marauders! While resting at the base of the tree, eating what I could salvage of my apple cobbler, I dozed off for a bit. Yes, the sun had moved considerably through the sky, but that's just due to the region and the time of year. It was only a few minutes, I'm certain. In that time, my entire travel pack and all of its contents had been carried off by Kilima's version of ants. Monstrous little thugs as big as your hand, more like. Editor's note, the largest Kiliman ant ever recorded was the size of a fingernail. When I awoke, they had already made off with my pack and were happily sinking their mandible knives into my flesh looking for more cobbler. Clearly, this had been the grand design of the nefarious jewel wing all along. It also occurs to me that those wicked village folk may have also been in on it, forcing all of that delicious pie upon me, knowing that I would be irresistible to the insect horrors that call this region home. Now I'm sticky, covered in painful bites, the sun is setting, and my supplies are gone. However, I remain undiscouraged, undeterred, for I am Professor Bonlin Ambipongo, the premier entomologist in Palia. And right now is the perfect time to seek out the Kilima night moth. Cataloging this creature in detail will further cement my name as one of the greatest bug brains of all time. You should have seen them, dear reader, as I trudged along the path, weakened by my valiant wounds and on the verge of dying of starvation from not having eaten all evening. I was considering returning to the village to rest and recuperate when I saw them. Great, horrible, winged beasts, beating the air into submission with their silvery blades as they cruised the sky. There must have been 4, no, 8, no, 20 of the monsters flying right toward me, no doubt excited by the scent of my blood. Editor's note: it is a known fact that Kilima night moths do not drink blood, but are attracted to fruit, like apples. Even the name Kilima night moth speaks to murderous intentions if I have ever heard it. I ran screaming into the woods as fast and far as I could. Fortunately, I ran into a local hunter who was able to point me back in the direction of the village. I forget the lad's name now, starting with an H, I think. I tried to warn him of the horrible moth bats and the danger ahead, but he looked at me and slowly shook his head. The poor boy probably couldn't even comprehend the danger I was frantically trying to communicate to him. It's also possible that these ignorant folk are used to such sights, but let me tell you, dear reader, civilized Missouri have no business out in the muck with these monstrosities. I barely made it back to the village. Editor's note: it is reported that Mr. Abipongo was found disheveled with minor bruising and a few ant bites, and slightly sticky to the touch. In conclusion, dear reader, you can see just how dangerous the art of entomology is, and why every bit of my fame is earned through blood, sweat, and tears. Though I do not catalog any of the fiends that I encountered, only a seasoned explorer such as I, Professor Bondin, Amapongo, could have survived what was clearly an impossible mission from the outset. The region of Kilima is a terrible place, hostile, unforgiving, and brutal, inhabited by unnatural beasts and savage barbarians who look to turn you into bait for the region's monsters with their pies. My advice to you is to stay out of the woods, leave the hard work up to us professionals, and continue buying my books until the next adventure. And to note, apparently Ani has checked that book out quite a few times. All right, and then here's a series that they introduced. I haven't found all the books. As I find the books, I will make note and read them to you guys. I think I read one of the books in the previous episode, or I think previous one. But anyway, Juggling 101 by Sir Roderick Pennybottom. Volume 1, Handkerchiefs. While learning to juggle, it's best to start with the fundamentals. Before attempting to juggle heavier objects like rubber balls, oranges, or live peakies, I recommend starting with something light like a scarf or a handkerchief. Handkerchiefs are so light that you can simply juggle them by dropping them in the air and picking them back up again. No need to throw them in the air. Just be sure not to juggle used handkerchiefs. That's how you end up with sticky hands. Gross. Gross. All right. I'm going to take you guys on a little jaunt. We are going to go this way. So kind of, at least early in my game, I don't know for other people, but early in my game, Gina tasked me with finding or I think I just found it on my own, a key. It was a broken key. And I gave it to Gina, and she said she would research it and try to figure out where it goes to. And I think I progressed in her friendship level, and she had a quest where she said, well, she found the other half. But there was a riddle attached to it. So I answered the riddle, I did what I needed to do. It was relatively easy. Grabbing the stuff. I can't not pick up the glowy things. So, coming here to this door is attached to a quest called Open the Door. And it's with Gina, you find half a key, and you give her half the key, and then she'll tell you that she's gonna, try to see what she can do. And when you progress in a friendship quest with her, she'll find the other half of the key, and there's a riddle that you solve, and then you can get into these ruins. And the first time I ran into these ruins, I didn't really understand what I was looking at, other than that it is a library. But then I quickly realized what it's about. So let's go ahead and enter. So this is when we were doing the flame, ruins. Hassie had mentioned his mother used to tell him a story about the Kitsu, and neither one of them could really remember the story. I believe this is the story: the Kitsu and the moon. Once upon a time, when only Grand Ignis hung in the sky, there lived, deep in a quiet forest, a small Kitsu. Like all Kitsu, she loved shiny things. So on one summer evening, as she tracked a shimmerfly in the air with her eyes, her gaze lifted up to the skies, where she caught sight of the moon. "Oh my, how bright and how beautiful!" she exclaimed, to no one in particular. Her eyes sparkled in the moonlight as she contemplated how to collect a piece of Ignis for herself. She scampered through the forest until she found the tallest tree, scrambling past startled Mujuni as she climbed and climbed and climbed. As she reached the top, she saw that the forest she had thought her spacious home was just a small patch of trees in a much larger landscape. As she looked up hopefully at the moon with her ears perked up, she realized it seemed just as far as it had when she had been on the ground. The tips of her ears drooped just a little, but as she dropped her gaze from the sky, she saw a cliff off in the distance, taller than the tree on which she perched. And off she went, scampering down the tree and over toward the cliff in the distance. As she got closer and closer, she realized just how big a task she had ahead of her. The cliff rose higher and higher, until at last she was at its base, looking up at an incline that seemed to reach all the way to the very same moon she wanted to catch. The Kitsu puffed up her chest and started on her climb. Onward and onward she ran, upward and upward she climbed, and yet further and further the moon seemed to be. And as she got close to the edge of the cliff, the Kitsu flopped down in exhaustion and in bewilderment, for she was no closer to the moon than she was a cliff's height ago. Drained of all of her energy, the Kitsu slept for a while, and when she woke from her well-earned slumber, it was light out, and the moon, while still beautiful, was not the only light illuminating the landscape. And there was so much to see. The little Kitsu had not realized how vast the world was, and how much there was in it. As she scurried along the cliffside, the mossy side she had climbed gave way to a darker, sharper edge. She slowed to a careful crawl, and peering over the edge, she saw that the cliffs here ended by plunging into a soft bed of sand, punctuated by the occasional rock formations. Every so often, one of the formations burst forth with a geyser shooting into the sky, and as she watched one erupt, she realized that she was looking up at the top of it. Gasping in delight, she took a deep breath, puffing out her chest once more, and waited for the geyser to drop below her. Before she could change her mind, she gathered up all of her tiny courage and flung herself over the edge as the geyser erupted once again. As the Kitsu was launched into the air, she had a moment of vertigo as she flipped and flipped, head over tail, tail over head, with a splash of sideways. Almost overwhelmed by the dizziness, she channeled her inner silver wing and spread her limbs taut, though her thick fur could stretch out and catch the air, letting her gently hover above the peak of the geyser. Up and up again she bobbed as she looked around in bubbling excitement that quickly fizzled as the novelty wore off. She was high, higher than she had ever been before, but the moon looked no closer than it had on the cliff or in the tree. She was closer to an expansive body of water she had never seen before than the moon she had been admiring this whole time. The ocean glistened all over as it undulated in the wind, so vast she couldn't see its entirety, and while she had to admit that it was beautiful, her heart was still set on the moon, and it still seemed impossibly far. In fact, it was hard to keep her beloved moon in sight as she bobbed up and down, and down. She couldn't stay up here forever. As relaxing as it was, she was still stretched taut. As she contemplated her next move, she saw a mountain whose peak disappeared into the clouds. Surely that was where she would be able to meet the moon, so she pondered and plotted, and the next time the geyser shot her into the air, she aimed herself at the mountain, stretching her paws as far as they could go, and then stretched just a bit further than that, and glided as best as she could towards the nearest geyser. And so she made her way, geyser to geyser, shooting up, sailing through the air, bit by bit, towards the mountain off in the distance. Eventually, she found herself landing amongst the trees growing from the base of the mountain. Puffing up her chest one last time, the fur on her chest rippling with energy, she began to climb once more. She scampered across the ground, she scurried up trees, she climbed small cliffs, she glided through the air, until one day, as the sun was setting, she broke through the last of the trees and found nothing else above her. As the last of the wash of pinks and oranges faded from the sky, and the moon brightened above her, she knew she made it. She had reached the top. Her ears twitched as she looked up triumphantly to greet the moon. And yet, it was just as far as it was before the mountain, the geyser, the cliff, the tree. It looked the same as when she first laid eyes on it. She looked around desperately for something, somewhere, even higher than where she was now. But there was nothing to be found. There was nowhere higher she could explore. The Kitsu deflated in defeat. Crestfallen, she returned home to her forest, her head hanging low, her ears drooping heavily, tail dragging in the moss. Night after day after night, she aimlessly wandered around and around and around until one night she stumbled into a small clearing. Startled, she looked up and saw the moon as distant as ever. In despair, she collapsed into a puddle of fur on the ground and began to cry. She begged for someone, for anyone, to help her reach the moon. "I have climbed the tallest tree," she explained. "I have scaled the tallest cliff," she shouted. "I have ridden the tallest geysers," she wailed. "I have conquered the tallest mountain," she howled. "I just want to be friends," she whispered, exhausted. She rested her weary head on her paws and let her tears form tiny rivers down her face, across her toes, and into the ground where they began to form a pool. Her pleas echoed far and wide, eventually reaching the three ancients. The phoenix, preoccupied with saving her nosy, wayward people, did not hear her appeals. The chimera, his far and quiet solitude broken, turned to face away from the chittering noise, and watched instead the technological marvels his inventive and clever people had begun to develop. But the dragon, still in its youth and without its own people, could remember what it was like to yearn, as its own nebulous yearning had brought into it being not so many years ago. But that is another story for another day. And so the dragon took pity on the poor Kitsu, gathering the dust of the stars and shaping a small, humble moon in its claws, carefully balancing it in the sky above the pool that had formed for her tears. And as the pool grew large enough that the Kitsu's paws were dipped in it, her tears began to tinkle as they fell directly into the water. Startled by the sound, the Kitsu looked up, and lo and behold, she saw the reflection of Luna shining back at her. "Why, hello!" she exclaimed happily, circling the edge of her pool around and around while the moon stayed centered and full, beaming back at her in delight. The dragon spoke then, its voice a deep rumble that she could feel throughout all of her fur and her whiskers. "Your new companion," it explained, "will wander just as you have wandered, but will always return just as you have returned. You are no longer alone." And as it watched the Kitsu settle down into a happy, peaceful slumber lit by the two moons, it began to contemplate its own loneliness. But alas, that is yet another story for yet another day. I think the other book is over this way. There's a couple of them, so bear with me. I just gotta remember where they are. Raina and the Silver Shoes. Once upon a time, there was a bright little girl named Raina. Raina loved to dance and dreamed of one day dancing among the stars. But sadly, the stars were too far away, and Raina was too little. "They are far away, and I am far too little." Mother told Raina, "To dance among the stars, you must make the right shoes." "But how could I make such shoes?" "You must make them with flow," her mother replied with a smile. Unfortunately, the moons were jealous of Raina. "Look at that girl dancing. If all the people watch that girl dancing all night, they will never look at me again," said Ignis. So the jealous moon took the girl's silver shoes, and she fell and fell until she wound up where she is today, as a cluster of constantly dancing stars. An old letter. Okay, if you're reading this note, it means either I'm out getting supplies or I didn't make it. You're probably also wondering why all the red tape just to get into the old university library. Well, my friends and I needed a place we could be safe from those things outside. We didn't know a lot about the shadow creatures, but figured they'd be pretty bad at solving riddles, so we decided to use everything we learned from our rune crafting classes to try locking the door so that the humans could find us. But those things couldn't. Hopefully, it wasn't overkill. But the fact that you're here means at least some people were able to get in with the keys we left around campus. Hope to see you soon. If not, I hope this place is safer for you than it was for us. Oh, place. There's shadow creatures. This place used to be a university that flooded. We can only kind of catch a glimpse over there. I've tried everything to climb up there, but there's really no way that I can tell. This looks like this may eventually be a door here that will open up. But yeah, there's like an invisible wall. You can't get up there. But yeah, I kind of stood back here and looked. And we really can't see anything over there, which is a bit of a bummer. But yeah, that is the lore that they've introduced to us. Again, there is the juggling books that I will bring as I find them and whatever else interesting things that I could find. Short episode, but thank you so much for keeping me company.